Okay, Parshas Vayigash, Perek Mem Dal Pasuk Aleph. Lo yochel Yosef l'sapik, chol hanitzovim olav. Yosef was not able to contain himself. As a result, all those who were surrounding him, who were with him, so Rashi explains, he wasn't able to tolerate that when he's going to reveal himself to his brothers at this moment. His brothers, it's going to be obvious they're going to be a level of shame that they never witnessed such a level of shame. Their reaction to what he's going to tell them. And because his brothers are going to be embarrassed in the presence of all these heathens, these Egyptians, he will not tolerate that his brothers should be disgraced before these Egyptians. That's what Rashi learns. V'shom she'echem is baishim bivodo lehem. And they're going to understand that the brothers are being embarrassed when he makes himself known to his brothers. Yosef l'sapek cholitzov molov. And he called out, he says, remove everybody from my presence. And no one was with him, not even the underlings, nobody, when Yosef made himself known to his brothers. So Rashi learns why? Because he will not tolerate that his brothers should be mizbayesh, should be embarrassed in the presence of the Egyptians. You know, Yosef had many axes to grind here. Now, Yosef, I had mentioned his first son's name was Menashe. Why did he name his first son Menashe? He nashani elokim esamoli. It's called ani beis ovi, because God caused me to forget all the angst, all the suffering of the household of my father. Meaning, the way I had mentioned, Yosef was the most beautiful human being who ever walked the face of the earth. And yet, he only fetched 20 shkolim, or 20 sloim, when they sold him to slavery, which you could buy a pair of shoes, a pair of sandals. I mean, how is it possible a man with such beauty, he should sell for such, literally, for pennies? So Chazal tell us, it's a medrash, that when he was in the pit, the Torah tells us, Haborek Eimbo Moyim, there was no water in the pit, but there was Nechosh v'Akrabim. It was a snake pit. The snakes were in the wall of the pit, and his brothers didn't realize it was a snake pit. But Yosef, when he saw the snakes and the scorpions, he was so terrified that literally he looked like a corpse. When they took him out of the pit to sell to slavery, he looked like a corpse. Meaning, they subjected him to such a level of trauma, and they tormented him the way they attacked him. They stripped his clothing off him, and they displayed such a degree of hate. And we explained it was literally a sin about Kelchus Ashura. It was a level of hate. They did not behave rationally. That's why Yehuda, although he had leadership, he was afterwards sent off, because they said, it's Yehuda, you're at fault. Because leadership means you don't allow your personal feelings to interfere with your clarity, with your objectivity. So after being subject to such hate, literally violent reaction, and such trauma, how could you have a relation with your brothers? It's not possible. As much as you could say it was the circumstance, it was a misunderstanding, but pain is pain. All of a sudden, somehow, his emotion, his mind is cleansed. It's as if he never experienced it. What was that a confirmation? Yosef understood that he was able to survive Egypt because he had the qualities of his father, that he could tolerate Golus, and he will prepare for the Golus Mitzrayim, that the Jews should be able to survive spiritually, that after 210 years they're leaving to go to Sinai. But factually speaking, regardless of his qualities and his capability and his capacity, but because of his personal feelings, which are the most extreme level of negativity towards his brothers because of the trauma they subjected him to, how could it be an appropriate caretaker and prepare for the goals? It's not possible. All of a sudden, you know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu does? He cleanses his emotion, his mind. It's as if he never experienced it. When God erased and removed all my angst and all my suffering, all my trauma, that was a confirmation that now it's time to begin preparing for the Golus. It was literally a miracle. Yosef, understanding this, he was able to deal with his brothers as if he never experienced anything negative from them. Therefore, now when there's a question, he feels he has to reveal himself to his brothers. Because as I mentioned yesterday, because Yehuda was ready to kill him and destroy Egypt with his brothers. And Egypt being the height of civilization, is the equivalent of destroying the world. Yosef says, if I don't reveal myself now, no one will ever know who I was, and the world will be destroyed. Therefore, I must reveal myself now. But he reveals himself. Reveal yourself. Don't take into account your brothers being embarrassed, because as I said, Asin b'kalkelis is Ashura, what he went through, you can't behave rationally. But Yosef was the most rational person, because God cleansed him, cleansed his mind, cleansed his emotion, as if he never experienced that. And he saw it as in them in the most positive light. As a result of that, he would not tolerate that these heathens should see his brothers being embarrassed when he reveals himself to his brothers. Otherwise, humanly, it's not possible. But it's only because of what he went through and what he experienced, the miracle of Hashem, cleansing him and removing the past as if it never existed. Therefore, he took all that in consideration. We find that Rachel, she was supposed to be the first wife of Yaakov. Her father switched them under the chuppah, and Leah was there. Yaakov understood who he's dealing with, and he took every precaution, and he'd given code words to Rachel that when he asks under the chuppah if it's her, she would say three things. Hafroshes chala, nida, and hadlokas aner. Those were the code words. And she shared them with Leah. Why? The reason why she shared with Leah, because what would be if Yaakov asks and she's not able to respond? Her sister is going to be embarrassed, is going to be disgraced. There's going to be such a explosion there, fracas. It's not the meant to be bride. It's Leah. What do you mean Do you know what at stake at this moment? If she gives the code words to Leah, there may be only one matriarch. Who said Yaakov will take another wife? Maybe it's over. And Rachel understood what it meant to be the aim of Klal Yisrael. She's giving up the matriarch position to be the mother of Klal Yisrael, that her sister should not be embarrassed. You know what level this is? It's a level of being able to rise above any level of personal interest to see it in the absolute sense of clarity. What about all the conflicts you have? Who knows what I'm giving up? Because at that moment, she didn't know she'd be taken as the matriarch. But for the sake, she's willing to give it up. Yosef, as much as what he experienced, this is one of the qualities he inherited from his mother, that he's able to rise above anything personal, regardless of the difficulty of it. That his brother should not be embarrassed in front of these heathens. That's what I was thinking. The other thing I was thinking to answer this, to explain this, that this ability to be able to deal with this is something which he inherited from his mother. Except you're able to differentiate. I'll make a differentiation. Why? You could ask, because there, Leah never did anything negative to Rachel. There was just a conflict, because what she's giving up here, he was traumatized. They abused him at the most extreme level, and despite that, he was able to rise above it. Nevertheless, you could say, but that quality, that ability, that characteristic, that he could rise above his personal conflicts and see it in the absolute level of clarity, that ability he inherited from his mother. He called out loud with an expression of weeping, crying. The Egyptians heard it, and the household of Paro heard it. So Rashi says, what's the difference between Beso and Avodov? V'yishma Beis Paro, Beso shel Paro, klom Avodov ubnei Beso, meaning his servants and the members of the household. Doesn't mean the house, the physical house. It means the household. Close Beis Yisrael, Beis Yehuda. He dismissed everyone, and then they heard him cry. So therefore, they understood then he was dismissed because whatever he was experiencing, they thought he doesn't want to embarrass himself. They don't know what he said to these people. Vayoma Yosef el Echov. Now, let's say it would have said Vayoma Yosef ani Yosef. The Torah wouldn't have said El Echov. Yosef said to his brothers, ani Yosef. Hora vichoy. If the Torah would have just said Vayoma Yosef ani Yosef hora vichoy, it's evident that they're his brothers. Correct? So why does it say El Echov? He said to his brothers. And then V'lo yochel Echov lanos oso kidiv v'porov. And again, it could say V'lo yochel lanos oso kidiv v'porov. They weren't able to respond without the Echov. Let's say it has to mention first time Echov and the second time Echov. It should say V'lo yochlu lanos. What again the Echov? I think the brothers did not recognize him to be who he was. If they would have appreciated who Yosef was, they wouldn't have suspected, as we discussed in the Seforno, that the whole idea was to discredit them in the eyes of his father. And ultimately, he wanted to have them destroyed, because Yaakov would curse them. Vayoma Yosef el Echov. He spoke to them, they were his brothers. He's showing them the relationship is brothers. They're brothers here. Ani Yosef. I'm one of you. I'm one of you. I'm not here to create an independent Jewish people. As we mentioned that Yosef had the capacity of 12 to father 12 tribes. And that was the misunderstanding. Ani Yosef Hoda Vichoy. Now that they realize in retrospect that the dreams were accurate and exactly as Yosef had said them. Now Echov. Now they realize the whole thing, this was a relation between brothers. It's not he was out to destroy them. Because they realize the Echov, therefore they couldn't respond. Because this was the most extreme level, rude awakening that a human being could experience. It was what they had done now becomes so unconscionable, they can't live with themselves. And therefore they were dumbfounded. Nilum Ponov Me'abusha. Because of the embarrassment. If you take a look in the Medrash Tanchuma, the level, a person, God forbid, gets a shock. A person, we have a cardiologist on the Zoom. Hey, Alan, I'm just acknowledging you. Okay? I'll send you the bill next week. If a person gets a shock of this sort, chas v'sholom, a person can have a heart attack, could die. The Medrash says that Yotze Nishmosam, when he said Ani Yosef, Horo Vichoi, they expired, they died. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Machai Mesim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu returned their souls. That's how overwhelmingly all-consuming this invasion was. Lo yochlu lanos oso, Rashi b'nei Abusha. But the Medrash says because they died from the shock. We find later when they shared with their father that Yosef was alive, it says, Vayofak libo. Vayofak libo. So over there, the Sefardo says, this is before we had cardiologists, Alan, it says he had like palpitations. His heart fluttered. The information was so overwhelming, he didn't have the capacity to be able to deal with it, that here he believed his son died and was mauled by a beast, and all of a sudden now he hears he's alive. His heart started to flutter. And the Sforno says, like, we find people when they receive certain information, which is too much for them to receive, it affects their heart. And they have difficulty breathing. Only because he was Echov. That's what was Nivel B'Ponov. Therefore, the Echov is essential to identify them as Echov, only because of that, that's why the reaction was as it was. There's a famous word from the Brisker Rov. Yosef says, Ani Yosef, Horov Yechoy. His brothers, when they first came, the second time with Binyamin, he says, how's your elderly father? Is he well? Hashalom, they said yes. They haven't been back to Egypt, to Canaan, since they came. Now he says to them, Ani Yosef, Horov Yechoy. Is my father still alive? We don't know any more than you know at this moment. When we came from Canaan, we told you. He's well and he's alive. Well, what's all of a sudden now? He's inquiring again, is he alive? Is this a question, or it's a remark that he's making? So the Brisker Rav explains the way Yehuda depicted Yosef. Yosef here he's behaving like the most compassionate viceroy. He wants to do the right thing. You people are the ones who failed. So he was depicted as what? Like a monster. A monster, a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's what Yehuda went and showed publicly what he was. So now Yosef says, you're painting me the darkest, most bleak, the most worst picture who I am. I'm the Yosef, and when you sold me into slavery, did you take in consideration that our father would be able to survive this? Where was your compassion? Where's your consideration? Whatever I am, even the way I displayed what I am, you're endlessly worse than I am. Ani Yosef. So it wasn't the question, am my father alive? How do you even consider doing what you did and not taking consideration whether your father is going to survive it? So it was the ultimate level of condemnation and criticism where they couldn't respond at all. That's why they couldn't respond, because they recognized the level of guilt and it was unforgivable what they had done. This is the Brisker Rov, how he explains the pasuk. So there's a famous medrash that the medrash says Yosef was the youngest of the brothers, and look at the level of embarrassment that he caused them. When they recognized the truth, they couldn't respond. After 120 years, when you stand before the Hashem in judgment, and he reveals to you your shortcomings, are we going to be able to respond? How dumbfounded are we going to be? What's the comparison? I mean, it was real. They did something unconscionable, right? After 120 years, Hashem, when he presents the case to us, the level of embarrassment be with a Kal V'chomer, how much greater will the embarrassment be? What's the connection? What's the commonality? Now, whenever we do something wrong, I'll give you an example. A person speaks Lashon Hara, and he knows he shouldn't say it. A person predicates it. I know I shouldn't say it, but look, you want to speak Lashon Hara, what do you have to give me the introduction? I know I shouldn't say it, but I'll just say it in either case. The answer is because the person has a conscience. We have to somehow put it in a context to rationalize that it's legitimate to say it, to take off the edge of how wrong it is. So somehow, whenever we do the wrong thing in our lives, there's a certain rationalization, justification to do the wrong that we do. As much as we know we're doing the wrong, it's all because we don't fully appreciate how wrong it is. But if we really would appreciate how wrong it is, and there's no way to justify and rationalize it, you'd never do the wrong thing. When are you going to come to that realization? We live our lives, it's okay, we go through Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, everything, and we say, we're pretty good at Rov, Sochias, we're at Tzaddik, we're not worried. When you stand before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he shows you exactly what you did, and there's no escape clause, and you can't hide. There's nowhere to hide, and you're confronted with this. As it says in Pirkei Avos, a person, if you consider that, you'll never come to the Avera. Never. So how much greater the embarrassment will be. Here they rationally they justified it, but it was all their ego. It was all ego driven. So what HaKadosh Baruch Hu presented, you can imagine how much greater the embarrassment will be. There's a famous Gemara in Sukkah. Gemara says in Sukkah that at the end of time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there's going to be a great eulogy. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to slaughter the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. And the tzaddikim will cry and the Rishon will cry. What are the Rishon crying about? They're going to see the Yetzer Hara as kechut hasara. It's no larger than a hairbreadth. And this little measly nothing controlled our lives and destroyed our lives. How can they be so foolish and allow the lives to be destroyed by this measly, whatever it is, this evil inclination? And they're crying. What are tzaddikim crying about? They see the Yetzer Hara as a mountain, and they're crying, how will we be able to conquer this mountain? So what are you going to say? So you should be rejoicing. Even though it's more than Mount Everest, you were able to deal with it and conquer it. It's the question Marshall deals with this. And it seems, he said, well, one are tears of pain, and the other tears of joy. It seems to me it's the same pain. They're both crying tears of pain. The Gemara, based on the Pasuk Matil, and the Gemara says in Kedushin, the Gemara says in Sukkah, that if not for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's intervention, we cannot survive the machinations of the Yetzer Hara. It's only because HaKadosh doesn't allow him. If not for the Siyata D'Shmaya, that Hashem gives us clarity, or keeps him at arm's length, you cannot survive the Yetzer Hara. Let's say a person's a tzaddik. Person, look, I'm well-weathered. I could take on the Yetzer Hara. The truth is impossible. So the tzaddik, even at the end of his life, what does he attribute his advancement and his rise in tzidkus, in righteousness to? He was able to meet the challenge. But who did he attribute that to? He attributed to himself. Only after 100, at the end of time, are you going to realize that humanly this is impossible. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's intervention only due to his assistance. That's why you could survive it. So when we believed it was us all these years, it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That would be the shame. As the Rosh is crying that this measly nothing controlled our lives, the tzaddik is embarrassed. We took the credit all these years. It's us. And it really is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's also, even when you do the right thing, there'll be a level of embarrassment at the end of time, believing it's us and not it's all HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Did something similar. What the Medrash says, that here Yosef, the youngest of his brothers, look at the shame they brought when they recognized the truth. You can imagine what HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the end of time, at the day of judgment, what embarrassed. We're going to suffer. But I'm saying it's similar to what the Gemara says in Sukkah, because it's going to be the moment of truth. And when you confront with the truth, the level of embarrassment is such you cannot tolerate it, and you have to dig a hole and disappear. Otherwise, you can't deal with it. He said to them, "Come close to me," and they came close. Vayomer, Ani Yosef achichem. Now he's saying, I am Yosef, your brother. Asher b'chartem osi Mitzrayim, who sold me to Egypt. Now, this was the confirming point that that he was Yosef. We find, if you read the parsha until now, Yosef somehow, through his divination with his goblet, he was able to know things which were impossible for a person to know. He knew their names. He knew their order of birth. He knew everything. He knew they had an old father. He knew everything. But this point that they sold him to Egypt, there was a ban. There was a cherem they had made that even Hashem's not permitted to reveal to anyone. So how did he know this? That he knew this piece of information means he has to be Yosef. Otherwise, it's an impossibility. So therefore he says, come, and this he didn't want anybody to hear. Because if this would have gotten out, it would have been detrimental to the way they would have been seen by the Egyptians. Whoever heard of brother selling their brother into slavery? So therefore he told him, come close. And he said it in an undertone, I'm Yosef, who you sold me to Egypt. That's the ultimate confirmation that he is Yosef. He's not some kind of charlatan trying to pass himself off as Yosef. Okay? Let's see. The Shuno Eli. Rosam Nisogam Locher. He saw them withdrawing. He said, I see my brothers embarrassed. The busha, the embarrassment, is a sign of tshuva. You understand? That they're recognizing the wrong. Some people, Lavan, when he pursued Yaakov, and he searched for his trophim and searched, and he found nothing. Yaakov really was upset and angry, and he told him, you cheated me 100 times. The children, everything I earned rightfully, the wealth is my wealth. And he irrefutably, he presented his case, Yaakov. You know what Lavan said? Your children are my children, your wealth is my wealth. It's like you spoke to the wall. Lavan, as much as it was irrefutable and he depicted it and he presented it in a way was so cogent, Lavan said, bottom line, everything's mine. The man had no conscience. If you have no conscience, you have no shame. That Yosef saw that his brothers were embarrassed to a degree that, as they said in Medrash, that one says that they expired, that was an indication they had a conscience. And the whole thing was a misunderstanding. It was only because of it, and they realized now, and that's why they're embarrassed to this degree. That's the first sign of tshuva. Therefore, now he sees that they're being embarrassed. He says, come close to me. And he reveals to them, Ani Yosef Shebachartem, Korolem B'Loshen Rako. He spoke to them in a tone which was softer. The Tachnunim, Verolem Shumol. And he showed them that he was circumcised. So the obvious question is, as I said, if the only way he could have known that they sold him to Egypt was because he's Yosef, why did he have to show him that he's circumcised? It's totally superfluous. Jay says, I'm Jay, shows you his births to everything. And I come from Washington, D.C. What does that add to it? Right? We could look at it, we could Google it, he comes from Washington, D.C. What's the adding that he showed if he was mole, that he was circumcised? Something. Yosef is 22 years in Egypt, exposed to the most vile environment, the antithesis of Kedusha. Ani Yosef, but who am I? Am I the same Yosef originally? That's the question. When he's showing him that he's circumcised, he says, I am the same Yosef. I never violated the Bris Kodesh. The Gemara tells us, God forbid, a Jew who has relations with a non-Jewish woman, HaKadosh Baruch Hu it says that, the Gemara says in Eruvin, that Avram Avinu sits at Pisgah Shel Gehenim, at the entrance of Gehenim, and any of his children are circumcised, as they're about to go in, he doesn't let them through. He prevents them from going through the entrance of Gehenim, because he sees they're circumcised, they're his children. The mitzvah Milah is his children, his progeny. If a person, God forbid, violated the Bris Kodesh, HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes the orlo, covers that organ, and Avram Avinu doesn't recognize him. The person goes straight into Gehenim. When he showed him the bris, what does the mole represent? He never violated. That's why Yosef is called Yosef HaTzadik. He's Yosef HaTzadik, that the environment didn't affect him and didn't diminish him as an iota. Just as Yaakov says, in love and garti, shamarti, I was not diminished as much as an iota. Yosef, by showing his brothers that he's mole, I'm the same Yosef. I was not diminished at any level. I'm still committed to that, what that represents. So it wasn't only enough factually, I'm Yosef, I'm the person, I'm no different as I was, even greater, because I was able to survive all the challenges of Egypt.
Rabbi,
Or in the Buchim was written by the author by the Rambam. It's guide for the perplexed. People they don't appreciate the value of mitzvahs. So he presented it, and he gave like a rational, like the chinuch gives a rational philosophical reason why mitzvah has value. So Rambam writes, what is the value of Milo? So he says, Milo curbs types of mishkol. A male has an overwhelming sexual drive. Once you cut the foreskin, the sexual drive is diminished. And because the Jews were coming to Mitzrayim, Yosef wanted to elevate them. He had these people submerged in this sexual perversion, this behavior. So by circumcising themselves, by actually diminishing that drive, he's going to elevate them. So the environment shouldn't be as extreme to impact negatively on his family. That's why he had them circumcised. So even Milo without prayer, you've done it. That was his intention. Yaakov circumcised his children as if it was post-Sinai. That was for the sake of the mitzvah of Milo. What he did to them was he impaired them sexually, that they should be less predatory in this area to elevate the environment.
Rabbi.
Good, Jay.
In a similar way,
we find that when Yaakov passed away, Parshas Vayechi, next week's Parsha, is Parshas Stuma. Because when Yaakov passed away, as long as Yaakov was alive, being in Egypt had no negative effect on Klal Yisrael, on his family. The moment he passed away, at some level, the influence of Egypt started to seep in. And maybe infinitesimal, but they were affected. If Yosef was able to raise his children, and they should be unaffected, Yosef's still alive. Why couldn't Yosef provide the protection for his family as his father provided protection? He's the lahava, right? He's the flame. I just thought of the question just now. What would you say?
Can you say the question again, Rabbi?
If Yosef was able to raise his children in Egypt, despite the fact that they were not under the tutelage of his father, as Yaakov raised his family in Choron, so now, even though Yaakov passes away, Yosef is the equivalent of his father. So the Torah should tell us only after Yosef passed away, that's when the Shibud started. And yet it says in Vayechi, it's a Parsha Stuma to tell, no, the moment Yaakov passes away, the Shibud at some level started to affect us negatively, although Yosef was alive. The answer is very obvious and very simple. What's Yosef? Yosef is Lahova. Yaakov is the Aish, Yosef is the Lahova. Yosef is the flame. It reaches out. But if you have no fire, you have no flame. You understand? Even though Yosef was in Egypt, but he was still connected to it. He was an extension of his father. But that was only as long as his father was alive. He had that siyata d'shmaya because he's representing his father. He's an extension of his father. The moment his father dies, Yaakov passes away, there's no Aish. There's no Aish, there's no Lahava. So that overwhelming, overreaching ability to create this environment no longer exists. As a result of that, it's Pasha Stuma, the Shibud started immediately. At that minimal, infinitesimal level.